did.
And he said, he did. And he said, what we did, we started what we call a chain home system. We put these RDF stations from facing France, from the northern part of England, all the way down to the south and around the south coast, and sparsely up the west coast of England. And we put in those stations, and we sited them, we located them based on the reflection waves off the ground. We set them on towers 125 feet high. We call them chain home stations because it was a chain of stations. They were to guard our homeland.
Well, if they're on towers there, weren't they targets for the Air Force, for the German?
Well, the Germans didn't know about this. This is before the war started. This was probably in 37 or 8.
This early, okay. I didn't know that.
37 or 8, they were just getting this started.
Yeah, they later learned about
Well,
it.
he went out and rounded up all the scientists in Scotland and England and brought them to Bodsey.
Okay.
And they said, we got to get this stuff done. So they took equipment that they had available.
Yeah.
And they put it together and they made it work. And they made it, built them for all the, they were practically hand-built, these first stations.
When did the Germans find out about this?
Well, now that's a very difficult thing to think. They knew something was going on, and they ran dirigibles over there, and they could tell that England knew where they were, but they were listening into their radios and things, them talking. They knew that they knew where that dirigible was. They knew something was going on, but they didn't know what it was. They did not have it.
Yeah.
Nobody else had it.
Okay.
So this thing started, they got to see chain home stations, the chain home low stations. Then they went on and developed others like the GCI, the Ground Control of Interception, and that was another type of radar. They had two antennas like bed springs on top of each other.
Oh, really? Okay.
These stations, though, had to have fixed antennas because they couldn't put turning antennas because of the wind and the weather.
Yeah.
They had to find a device that would change the phase of the signals so they could make the wave change with the antenna standing still, and they did that. So they could determine from these top stations, they could determine by the distance out and back how far the airplane was in distance. They could tell by setting their device inside the radar station, they could tell what azimuth it was. Then they could tell which finger was going through its elevation. So they could tell these stations at long distances. But when they got in close, that pulse that they had right at the first blinded out the first part, so they had to do something about that. So they developed what they called the GCI, the Ground Control of Interception devices. And these were, as I told you, two bed springs. They would just go out for 50 miles. And so these stations would deliver them by azimuth to these GCI stations, and they would control the fighter planes, and they'd bring them in on the tail of the German plane.
They'd call them in on
and shoot right down from that was the type of the way they worked.
Okay. This was their reaction because they knew Hitler was taking over most of Europe.
Oh, yes.
And by the end of the 30s, he had already
Well, anyway,
France.
everybody was so elated with this system and so delighted with it, the king knighted Watson Watt.
Oh, this is why he got his.
So he became the father of British radar, and the British radar is credited with winning the Battle of Britain in 1940 and 41 and destroying the Luftwaffe.
Yeah.
So when we made our invasions back, in 44?
Yeah.
44, 45, I guess.
Well, 44 is done.
44.
It was D-Day.
And I went in 45, 44 in Pacific, that's right, October of 44.
Yeah.
They were in June of 44.
Yeah.
Well, the Luftwaffe was pretty well hurt, pretty bad. They didn't have many airplanes or many strips left. Our planes had just taken them over completely. And so Watson Watt became Sir Robert Alexander Watson Watt, sir. And we were very delighted to have him to come to Bodsey and speak to our class and tell us this remarkable story that I thought it was.
Well, that is a remarkable story. Now, how long were you there?
Anyway, they told us right after that in June of 1942, you're going back to the United States. So I left from Gourock, Scotland, with the 2 or 3 troop ships. I was on one of the troop ships, the Morondo, I believe. And we had the battleship New Yorker and a cruiser and 4 or 5 destroyers. And we came across the North Atlantic, and they put us off in Boston. We went through the Cape Cod Canal into Boston Harbor, got off and got on the train and went to reported into Fort Monmouth. And that is the first time we heard the word radar.
That's when you heard that.
We had been using RDF all of this time, radio direction finding. Now was radar, RADAR, radio direction and ranging.
Okay, they just put extra A in there.
And they gave credit for a colonel at Fort Monmouth for coming up with that acronym. But he has never been publicized like Sir Watson Watt, though. The British, he's
Well,
really,
Watt was the one that found it.
he found, he developed really the technique
Uh-huh. Okay,
for doing this work.
okay.
And then I was sent to Orlando, Florida, to the Fighter Command School, which later became the Army Air Force School of Applied Tactics, and I taught radar.
Okay. Now, what rank were you by this time?
I was got to be a first lieutenant,
Okay, so you're getting on up there, okay.
one first lieutenant.
All right.
And then they said that they told us that there was intelligence information that the Germans had the capability to come across the North Pole in the wintertime and put a base on Hudson Bay and on the ice, and they could bomb Duluth, Minnesota, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and stop our iron ore from flowing to Pittsburgh and stop our steel production, which was very, very critical.
It's the first
So,
time hearing of this. I
They
know-
decided that they had to put a defense in, so they sent me to Sioux, Michigan,
Yeah,
to Sioux Locks. I put a radar in just a short distance from the Sioux Locks,
yeah.
and it worked very well.
You ever detect anything?
Well, they didn't. No Germans came. Later on, they sent me on up to Ontario. I went up through to Cochrane, Kapuskasing, Hearst, several other places along northern Ontario. We're going on to the Hudson Bay for its radar, but Rommel lost in Africa about that time,
Okay,
and they said Germans do not have the capability to come in and put the units on the Hudson Bay, so they canceled most of the project of the Sioux defense. Now, they went ahead and put an airstrip in at the Sioux,
yeah.
a fighter airstrip in, which the radar that I put there was working with, and it was very successful. So I went on back to Orlando, Florida, and I taught for a while there, and then in March of 1943, they sent me to New Guinea.
That's a big change, wasn't it?
I was told to put a radar station in Dobadura, New Guinea, or somewhere in that area. So I went to San Francisco and got on a B-25. It had 4 or 5 other people, officers on there with me, but the plane was loaded with aircraft parts. It was, they said they had a shortage of aircraft parts over in the Pacific, and so this plane was loaded as it was a converted B-24. And we flew from San Francisco to Honolulu, to Canton Island, a little island way out in the middle of the Pacific. It only got one tree on it.
One tree.
And navigation those days, was not too good. They were lucky always to find Canton Island. We flew from Canton Island to Fiji to New Caledonia. When we got to New Caledonia, they radioed into our airplane and said that they understood there was a electronics training officer on the plane, and they had just put a new radar, and they wanted to come and see if it was working right.
Oh, really?
So they met me with a lorry when we landed in New Caledonia. These were Australians.
Uh-huh.
And I went out that night and inspected the trip. The machine looked like it was working very well. And we had inspection at midnight
Oh, did you?
for the radar station. That was really an experience.
Uh-huh.
Went in, they had a meal at 1 o'clock in the morning in their mess hall for me, because I was there inspecting their unit.
Oh, that was nice.
So that was real nice. They got me back to the airplane at 7 o'clock to catch it. We were going into Brisbane, Australia.
Yeah.
So we landed in Brisbane the next morning, and I reported into the AMP building, which was the American headquarters in Brisbane. General MacArthur had just moved there from Melbourne, and he had his offices on the top floor of the AMP building. And,
Did you get to meet MacArthur?
I passed him in the hall several times and saluted him.
Okay.
To actually being introduced to him, no, I didn't. But I'll tell you another experience I had in New Guinea with him, which was very interesting.
Okay.
Anyway, I went on to New Guinea, and the radar was shipped from England, and it came in. They sent it into Oral Bay, which is on the north side of New Guinea. I had to get concrete and all kinds of building materials over to the site, and I flew 27 C-47s across the Owen Stanley Range with materials on them. Not all at one time,
Yeah.
but one plane made that many trips back and forth to get the materials over there.
Yeah.
We got the radar up from Oral Bay and put it on site, but nobody was there to put it in. I had an A1 priority to put that radar station. I worked for several weeks picking a good location for it,
Yeah.
which I was trained to do.
Yeah.
So I went to the chief signal officer, General MacArthur's chief signal officer. He was Major General, and I told him that I had A1 priority to put that unit in, but nobody was interested in putting my radar in. They're all building airstrips.